The conference has, I think, a very strong positive background politically, which is the wish by the Norwegian government, both the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but also Development and Environment and other stakeholders, to to contribute to this year of the commemoration of the Refugee Convention and the Convention, the 50 years of stateless people. Plus, I think we must also add the context of the ongoing negotiation for a climate framework, a renewed global climate framework that had a big success, as some of the speakers said this morning, in Cancun, but all the low-hanging fruit were picked very, very ably with the help of the Mexican leadership. So and as you've heard this morning, very precise descriptions of risk, climate risk. What does it mean? It's not something for the future, it's now. So what drives all of us in this conference is really a sense of urgency. We must act on what we know. If we don't do that, all the trends that we already are familiar with will be magnified and amplified until our ability to manage the economic impact, the changing climate, the global warming, all this means change. And it is in our hands to manage that change, but we are too slow to recognize what requires doing. So this is the big background, and what this group of scientists, practitioners, governments, civil society will aim at bringing away from the conference is a summary set of points which the minister suggested we call the Nansen principles, inspired by the great Norwegian Fridtjof Nansen, who was both a courageous, innovative man and a great internationalist, who really says that nothing can be achieved without cooperation. So in that spirit, this conference wants to offer some strong principles that we can take to all these fora where policies are set and decisions are taken that will protect not only the most vulnerable people, but in fact all people on this planet Earth. A couple of speakers this morning have made the important point that there are many laws, treaties, frameworks that provide protection in different aspects. Now, the critical question is, can you distinguish, and if people are displaced or migrating for climate reasons or for environmental reasons, from other triggers why people move? And the clear message, I think already this morning, is that it's one, do not undermine the strong agreements that exist on refugee rights. Don't dilute them by introducing concepts that are not as clear, such as environmental refugees, which some people use. So we heard very clearly here, let's not undermine what is already very strong, but let's see how we can use, for example, the guidance on internally displaced people, which is based on accepted legislation, accepted laws and principles in different kinds of legal framework. Let's look at if we can use that type of framework to expand the necessary protection and assistance to people that may already be, in many cases, but also maybe in future, displaced, particularly cross-border, no longer internal displacement, but external displacement, temporarily or otherwise. That is a group that needs some particular attention, because there is this sense of, with disasters and climate change have no borders, and therefore the impact of these extreme events also have no borders, and people may need to cross borders. So how can existing strong collaboration be used also to ensure that these people are not left without protection and assistance. I would say they are recognized more in let's say in an expert community, but there are clear and complicated definitions to work through. You know, if climate impact, climate risk, disasters, natural hazards, environmental reasons, they are all reasons that commingle. So maybe, and that is recognized clearly. There is an understanding of that displacement. What's the nature of displacement? How long it lasts? How do you identify it? There's a lot more research and understanding that need to be accumulated. But meanwhile, we really must not take the lack of precise certainty for an excuse for inaction, which was another call this morning. We know enough what to do, and I think we can still act on everything we do, while much more needs to be invested in understanding human mobility, why people move, what drives them, and where do they move to, and for what reasons. So it's both understanding the origin and the destination much better. So if people need assistance, they can be assisted, but also the overall impact of climate risk and climate change really will lead to a redistribution of the total population on Earth to safer areas, because too many of us live in too high-risk areas, and this is true both for very poor countries and for very rich countries, as we see increasingly. I think the clear message here is understand that climate change is not evenly distributed. It affects certain areas, has already affected since 30 years certain areas in the world much more hard. They live in a more vulnerable environment and people are poorer. So what is required is a clear identification of what are these areas, and a political commitment to ensure that these populations are supported, both for mitigation and adaptation purposes, but also to develop more appropriate livelihoods, economic development issues. I mean, we know very dry areas in the world, Western Sahel. We know about small island states, particularly the poorer ones. We know there are certain landlocked countries that are very isolated with their issues today. So I would say that the key is to move from really theory and talking about hypothetical future development. Say it's happening now. Let's tackle it as something that is important for all of us, not only for the people that live in the most vulnerable countries. And it's a shared burden and a shared responsibility. One message that I very much appreciated that it emerged this morning is the question that Professor Nansen threw out. When is the public going to engage in their own future? When is the understanding that climate risk is not something that concerns others, but it also concerns me and you? Only when we create a social demand for the safety of not only our children but ourselves, then I think we will get a much stronger political impetus for politicians also to take sometimes very tough decisions about choices on energy, on genuine mitigation, but also when it comes to supporting populations in the most vulnerable countries in the world to ensure that we have a equitable and sustainable impact of all the risk management work that is being done today.